Welcome. You have arrived at the process. My name is Dr. John Bush. This is lesson 25 or rocking and rolling. Running back positional analysis part 2B. Okay, so we are looking generically without actually players' names, looking historically, trying to up our reference class forecasting and finding some approaches and some thoughts about our next season drafts. We're trying to help you and others win your fantasy football drafts. My data says that's about 60% of the game. So, with that said, let's continue our journey here. And we are now turning to running back metrics, passing and rushing. Running backs will be the most complex position on the offense as they have passing and rushing characteristics. And that means we have to look deeper in both areas to get a full picture of the show. And so there is some skewed situations or skewed players that are more towards the pass end, or some are more towards the rushing end. So we're going to see if things like age, experience, trends, kind of see where all that's going to lead us, if anywhere, right? So let's look at the year from '02 to 2020, looking at the sum of rushes. The next column is average of rushing yards, sum of receptions, and average of reception yards. Okay, so, and I circled the top five in each category. And let's begin with sum of rushing. We are not in the era of the golden age of running backs. That was way back in the old days. And I think kind of the rushing based running back had their heydays uh, 02 to maybe '08, '09, something like that. And that has progressively dropped. And we hit the low in 2018. And we bounced a little bit off the low here in the last 2 years, but really not so good as far as comparing in these years here. Of course, you would suspect that rushing yards by quarterbacks, here's the average, would be pretty much tied to those years, and that's with one exception, 2011, pretty much the show. We are down at 280, which is the fourth worst in 18 years. So we were a little higher the last preceding 17, 18, and 19, but we had definitely a down year. Could be COVID, and we might bounce back and get a little bit, but as I'm seeing the trend, I won't be expecting some lofty numbers like we saw during the golden age of running backs there. What about receptions? Well, the top four uh, receptions were 19, 18, 17, 15. And we didn't do too bad in 2020, 25, 25, and that's fairly high. Actually, if you look across the spectrum, that would be what, the sixth best or seventh best. We did see a little bit back in the '02, must have been a very interesting year when you have the high rushing yards and the receptions are high as well. That must have been a rock'em sock'em year. But it is clear that we are now in the era of running backs that can pass catch. and that is confirmed by looking at reception yards, the same kind of thing. We actually had a drop here in the actual yardage, but the preceding years was, the top four. And again, 2002 was exceptional. Very strange year. I should go back one day in my spare time and take a look at that year. I don't know, just for funsies. So we did drop a lot on the average reception yards. Is that COVID? Are defenses finally starting to catch up with that? Are offenses tipping the hand they're going to be passing to the running backs? Something certainly happened. Of course, it could be a blip, kind of the anti-giraffe in the group, right? You get all these high numbers and then you see a drop. I'm going to be cautious but optimistic that we will kind of bounce back to 19, 18, 17 levels, but keeping an eye on this new phenomenon there. And I think we'll certainly next year at this time we'll know more about what's going on. So I think giving credit to running backs that can pass catch, I'm not sure that's an earth-shattering statement, but in case you haven't been, then I would urge you to certainly put a gold star by those running backs that you're looking at, and if they can pass catch, that's got to be, especially in PPR, right? Got to be a good thing. So that's kind of the trends. Pure rushing, we are in some of the lowest times, but passing, we are in the best times, right? So the worst times are the best times. Sounds like a book. Uh, what I did was I transform and normalize the numbers based on the top, and then which would be 100%, and every metric then is related to that 100% figure. So just kind of see where we're at as far as percentiles. Sometimes that's easier to view than actual numbers if you think about things in a percentage kind of way. And again, I like to use different ways to look at the data, not just to do it, but because myself, I think I remember better when I go through and slice and dice and do it a couple ways. It finally gets through that hard head of mine, all the bones there in my pea-sized brain, trying to shoot it through there, right? I need me an idea gun, shoots idea projectiles into the head there. But I think it's going to show what we just talked about, but maybe even with more clarity. We are in the worst times for actual rushing, amount of rushing. We're 15% ish, 12, 15, 13% off the tops. Okay, so that's a significant number. And notice rushing yards were about 17, 13, 14% off the tops. Not the worst, but certainly we have seen nice drops from about 12 on. And receptions, we've seen exact opposite here. Okay, we're in the best times for pass catching running backs. We do see these 2 years. And as far as reception yards, we've done really well. But something happened here. Don't know if that's a blip in the data or is that a reflection of defenses getting a little better at covering running backs out of the backfield for passing. Don't know. Just be aware. But I think this metric here suggests we're getting receptions, this would say, but it's not, it's shorter than normal, big time shorter than normal, actually. 26% of the top. That's not so good. Okay. So I think, to me, I like to look at this data. It gives me a lot more clarity than just looking at the raw metrics there. Okay. So here is the scaled rushing and passing number. So I took all the metrics and just did polynomial trend lines to smooth out the data, looking for the trends. And we see, for instance, the red is the rushing yards. I'm sorry, reception yards right there. Reception yards. Okay. I wish I could draw. Reception yards. The orange is rushing yards. Okay. So at one point, reception yards percent-wise were actually higher than rushing yards, but the rushing yards kind of are, I'm sorry, this is the orange. Yeah, reception yards. Okay. I mean, rushing yards. Orange, I'm sorry, that is the sum of rushing, and then the blue is the sum of receptions. Percentage-wise, receptions are doing quite well here, and we did pretty well in reception yards. But notice the rushing has dropped. Okay, from the golden era, it's been a drop. And for the most part, it's been a slight drop in the actual yardage here. But I think the take home is pretty much the same, that we're seeing more pass catching from running backs here and less total rushing in each team on average. On average, right? We know there are teams that specialize in rushing versus the passing for their running backs. And it's good to know those, and we'll tease those out later. I've got the metrics coming. But right now we're just, parsing out the system here, deconstruction. And so not only do I try to find some reference class forecasting metrics to kind of have a base to work off of, but, I do like to see, individual player type metrics, team type metrics as well, and turn my focus in a deconstruction way. It's a complex system, weekly game, complex system, and I'm trying to break it down. And so it's a process in science we call deconstruction, right? If you want to figure something out, you start taking it apart, and then you can actually put it back together and see, what the effect is, right? So and I tell this to my students. So for example, if we didn't know what a car was and we tried to figure out, okay, what makes this thing run? If we took the windshield wipers off, it still runs, right? If we took the rubber tires off, it can still run on its rims. That's not it. What happens if we take the engine out? Uh-oh, it's not going anywhere. Put the engine back, it runs. So now, what part of the engine is essential? Can we get a little running? If we take the oil out, right, we can get some run, but eventually it will burn up the engine. But, it's not 100% necessary. I mean, yeah, necessary for long term, but not just necessary to move. So that's how we deconstruct a complex system. And I look forward to when we have enough computational power to actually do all this in a holodeck, right? I.e., like Star Trek, so we can put fantasy football all onto a holodeck, and you could walk in and actually break things down. Imagine walking into a team and pulling out a player and then running their system through and see what happens when you got rid of that player, or changed the algorithm of the player and made them more mistake or less mistakes and see what happens there. So you can, that's another way. I don't probably won't live to see that, but I can imagine eventually we'll be having fantasy football year round with historical numbers and algorithms, and it'll be all virtual, and we'll be doing virtual fantasy sports, right? I don't know how they'll combine it, but football for a quarter, then you'll do 9 innings of baseball, then you'll finish up with a last quarter of a basketball, and you'll have a big fusion event here. Uh, that will be interesting. I'm sure they'll gamble to make money off that somehow. Okay, so enough of me going off on a tangent. I shouldn't do that, but I do. Okay, so end of the season running back rankings. This is in the quadrants. So the 75 to 100 is the top 25 at the end, the next 25 the next, and the lowest 25 is 0 to 24. And just looking at the average rushing yards, reception yards, some of reception, some of rushing. So you get an idea of the actual ratios there. Is that kind of changing? Looking at metrics that way. To me, I like to set it at 100% so I can look at the different ratios. It's a lot clearer to me. Really not a lot of difference in ratios here. Just the amounts, right? So the 49th down, you're getting about 10% or 9% of the rushing and rushing yards. So 10% of the action is there. So probably we want to stay above the 50 percentile. And you're only getting about a third of the action. So the majority of the play will be, as you would predict, the top quarter. And that's not earth-shattering as well. But notice reception, 40%. So that's a 10 to 13, 14% play. So that means that there are running backs that are not doing so well on the rankings, but they're producing, 40% of the rushing, the reception yards. So there's this group that are probably maybe under the radar a little bit, or might be worthy of some late round picking that have some reception characteristics. So I know we're looking for the handcuffs, but also take a look at some of these reception folks in the next 25 down from the top, right, the 50 to 74th. That's starting to be of significance, that 40th, 44, 45 percentile there. Really interesting. And notice you even get a little bit of blip, 25 to 40th percentile. You're getting double what you're getting on rushing. So it looks to me like the best running backs are the rushers, and certainly rushing in reception, but the lesser running backs are probably keeping themselves on the team because they can pass catch maybe on third down or other critical times. So just kind of in generic looking here, and this is across 18 years of data, but I think I wasn't necessarily expecting that one way or the other. I didn't have a feel for that, but I thought that was something to consider as well. That, when you're looking at those later running backs, not only kind of a handcuff probability number, whatever that is, have have the reception kind of number out there. Might be a good way to catch you somebody here. I don't know. Certainly you want somebody who can rush and pass, right? You're greedy. We want it all, right? But there's some suggestions that there may be some advantages in the deeper running backs to those who can catch passes there. Just look at that. Think about that. That was intriguing and, again, unexpected to me. This is just a graph showing the bar graph showing these metrics here. And it shows this is the reception. If you divide this into two, right? Here's the reception over here. Here's the rushing. And here's what the metrics are showing, that they're higher than the rushing side. Very interesting. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. May get you a point or two. Who knows? Sometimes you'll be surprised how this game comes down to a catch or two. So you never know. Bye weeks and whatnot. There may be some key players here to help you out that week. Okay, so now we're going to turn to age sectors and looking at the top half of running backs, and we divided those into the top 25 and then the next 25. There they are, is what I call percent ranked sector here. The rushing, the rushing yards, the reception yards, and I scaled everything to the 100 percentile so we can just get a ratio of what's going on here. So young players, notice that we're not seeing the difference between rushing and reception on the 50th to 74th percentile. So the aggregate data says there's something, but when you cut it with the age, you're not really seeing that difference here. Let's see what we see going forward. 24 to 26, a little bit older. Here's the big difference now. So looks like if you're a young running back, maybe you get, even if you're not at 100%, maybe they're giving you some more rushes just to make sure, because you don't have a lot of experience. And so they're giving you some rushes as well as pass. But once you've kind of hit 24 to 26, you're either a rushing person, a passing person, or both. And they kind of know that, so you may not get as many rushes. That's interesting. But you probably, and this may be a skill that comes on, you actually get an increased reception. So it looks like the rushes go down, the receptions go up a little, but not so dramatic. 27 to 30, the older ones here, man, we're still going up on receptions. So it looks like that the older the running backs that are not quite, in the top group, they're earning their keep by being pass catchers. So that may be a trend. And that continues with the old dogs as well. Very intriguing. And notice at the same time, the best running backs of the old dogs are skewed to the rushers. So they're probably more of a skew between the older running backs. You've got more of the rushers only or more of the pass catchers only type players, which is very interesting. So I think you can parse out and apply this data on top the metrics for our drafts here. So make some notes in your draft, draft sheets there, and apply some of the age changes that's occurring. But to me, the most surprising was seeing the young players getting their shot. And I think even if they're not producing the best, I think they're still, coaches are smart enough saying, it's young, maybe they'll develop into something. And maybe they do. Maybe that's assigned, but that's how I read the data, that they're, pretty much still trying to find what they have early. But I think they're starting to make that decision after 24 to 26, and that's just even more skewed as they get older in the league, that they're becoming more certainly specialized kind of running backs. Very intriguing to me. So that way, that anytime we can parse things out of the system and break a little of the complexity down, that's got to be some type of advantage for us, especially deeper into the draft here. Think about that. Put that age on top of that a little bit. Especially in PPR, older running backs may not be as much of a liability as you think. Okay, I thought this was great data. Proud when data really informs me. And this is just the chart showing that, and I have some purple uh, circles showing the what are the best in the 50th to 70th fourth percentile, and you see that's on the rushing side of the ledger there. The if you look at how they're rushing yards, reception yards, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the age going up, and you pretty much see that the receptions are playing a bigger role as we get older here, and that's pretty much what we would show. But I think that pretty much tells us. And note the best running backs are more of a lesser rushers. At 31, they're probably the youth, or maybe further down, or getting the rushing there a little bit. Very intriguing chart here for me. Okay. So what about then? We left age, and then I like also experience. Sometimes we can parse things out a little bit. So we have the top running backs, top quarter. Then we have the experience levels, rookie, 2 years, 3 years of experience, 4, and so forth, all the way down to 11 plus years experience. How we doing for rushing, reception yards, reception, rushing, actual metrics? I covered the top 2 here, and we see that rushing yards are peaking at 7 years of uh, experience in the top. Okay, so the rookies are, and the 5th year for some reason were low. So these were the low in the first 7 there. And notice the old dogs are really not producing for us. There's not a lot of those in the top group at all. Reception wise, you're seeing a little bit of skew towards youth and experience. Rookies are still not producing like the 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds. And then here's receptions, the same things. And of course, the actual rushing is skewed. So age-wise, probably 27, but experience-wise, about 7 years. So if I'm a dynasty, I'm for sure thinking of getting, cutting my contract with those guys, those older running backs, probably 6 or 7 years in. So, you don't want to stay too late, certainly. So you want to get some value coming out there. But I think dynasty people are pretty sharp and are aware of the, I don't know if they're aware of the age versus the experience conundrums there a little bit, because there's not quite, there's some variation in what the data is saying, because some people start really young, some people start a little older, so the experience may not line up necessarily with age. It's going to be close, okay? It's going to be close. Got to be close, right? Okay, so plotting the rushing versus the passing, clearly, there's, a big gap, you know, uh, in the metrics here. And I was looking at the passing uh, yards versus so this is what is it? The red is the rush, and that is the blue is the reception yards. The yellow is the receptions, and the green is the rushing yards. So rushes and rushing yards, receptions and reception yards are like that. So pass versus rush here. Uh, Going down a little bit. Okay, looks like we hit kind of, and we've dropped in the last few years, and we've dropped a little bit in the passing as well. Okay, have wide receivers and tight ends, and notice the gap starting to shrink a little bit. So just keep that trend on speed dial. Notice we even see a crossing of the data here between rushing and yards. We've never seen that in 18 years. So COVID was maybe a very strange year, and that, maybe we'll see a bounce back, okay, in 2021 or so. Just be aware, we saw some narrowing here as well. That tells me that, the COVID did have some effects. We just didn't, it wasn't as clear as maybe people look, but when you're looking across 18 years of data, that is very unusual what happened in the metrics of the running backs there, from what I can see in the COVID year. The next wave of running backs, 50th to 74th, we're seeing again the young is being given the highest rushing. They're actually getting the highest yardage. That's very interesting. Notice the old dogs. They're hanging around in this era. If they're still playing, looks like they're mainly rushers. Reception wise, we're seeing a peak in those guys, 6th, 7th, and 8th. Receptions are keying even into the 10th year. Here certainly looks like you have a sweet zone with 6, 7, and 8. So notice that the fifth, it was 5th, 6th, 7th, and now that has slid with the worst running backs, 50th to the 74th. So if they're hanging around but they're not producing like the top folks, it looks like they're earning their keep. They're hanging around because they're catching more passes and doing well. They're certainly not rushing as much, right? And if you're hanging around 11 years, you're probably a rusher at that point. I think that data is pretty much, because here's the rushing. Looks like it's drop, then it springs back. So those that have probably, what's happening is some are leaving the league, right? And so whoever's surviving, the Frank Gores, they're never going to be up at the top, but they're still enough to provide, some helping out the team at somewhat, and they're going to be primarily rushers. So I think if I'm looking at an old dog, they better be good rushers, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I wouldn't expect them to be pass catching phenoms with that much experience. They're hanging around because they can rush. Okay. So that, I think we've said that. Here's the data as well. Looking at the rushing yards here, the reception yards here. This was the highest. This era was the highest, so we're kind of dropped a little bit, but we're kind of in a better position. But rushing has really gone down Coming back a little bit, maybe we'll hit another plateau, don't know. But this was clearly the better rushers as far as total rushing were down here. Not sure we're getting a lot of information there, but I did track the data anyway for you to look at. It's kind of flat. Both of those lines are kind of flat. Okay, age sector and year sector. So, I looked across the 18 years. Now let's focus on the most recent block of data. So I don't want to miss anything that's new and different, right? So here's the actual uh, age sector and percentage of rushing, percentage or average of rushing, fantasy points, percentage passing, and percentage of fantasy points. So what I did was I looked at the average rushing base fantasy points and passing, and then I figured out the balance of the running backs in that group, right? To see what the ratio was between rushers and passers. It's good to know the proportions here. So to me, probably the most important are here looking at the balance at this point. The youth, 57 to 43. So they're definitely, if you look at the difference there, what is that? 14, 50% difference. Notice the 24th to 26. Notice the passing is coming up, and notice by 27 to 30, big time passing. So notice they're getting, your youth, you're getting a lot of rushing, and those that are surviving are really picking it up with the passing. And again, if you're surviving so long in age, you're a pure rusher. I mean, 60-40. That's the biggest skew there. So I think that's kind of interesting. And when you compare to the averages, if you look at, when I say scaled here, the scaled balance is positive towards rushing, so they're above average and way above average if you're old. So young and old are above average, break even, and below average here at this age. And notice the balance with the passers. So if you're going to keep a 27 to 30-year-old, you're expecting them not to be as much a rusher as they are a passer. They're skewed exactly opposite. And then those that probably don't lead the league, the rushers, the pure rusher in that age group, are surviving even further, but their pass catching skills have declined. But they're rushing, they can just barrel ahead. So there's kind of almost a life cycle to the running backs. I think this data is telling us the life cycle, that you come in, they rush you. They start teaching you how to catch passes. You get a little seasoned, and hey, you can catch passes. So they try to balance you out by 26, you're as balanced as you'll get. And then the young people are replacing the older dogs at 27, 30, and the ones that are still viable, they increase their passing. And then if you're still in the league, you're getting that subset that can pretty much just barrel ahead and rush, and kind of a battering ram player at that point. So to me, that's what a life cycle is of our running backs here. I'm not sure anybody's ever thought about that. I haven't seen that. It's probably there. It's just people hadn't put it together. But that's how I see kind of a life cycle. So I think you could take every running back and actually kind of, if you're an investor in the stock market, they do sector investing, right? energy, tech, industrials, transportation. So now I think you could almost start writing their journey, again, this is on average. This is something to give us a foundation. Nobody is average. It's just where you start looking. Okay, so we're not done. But I think you can add some notes to your running backs and kind of just see where you think they might progress here in the system. I mean, if you're a running back and you can't rush and you're not doing so good as a rusher when you first come in, that's not good because most of your brethren are being expected to rush, and you're not catching passes. Are you long for this league? So the breakthroughs, the ones that are going to survive, probably going to have that pass catching component from 24th to 30. So you're expecting even to get better. They're going to get even more refined into the pass catchers. And then if they're still able to, their body's still able to continue, then you're kind of flipping back and using the rushing lens again. The straight ahead Frank Gore types, I believe, are the marquee player for this group here. So if somebody can survive that long, then that's probably been their progression for the most part, on average. And I really like this. It's nice to put a kind of a verbiage. Everybody remembers stories better than numbers, by the way. So just remember that if you can take these metrics and make a story out of it, we tend to remember stories, right? Fables, myths. We remember those. Those are, oh yeah, we went down there and we did that. Okay. Or, some of our most valuable knowledge, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? That's a visual story versus 80% of the time they won't drink. It's like, okay, 80%. Do I remember that? Okay, lead them to water, but they don't drink. Okay, I can remember the story. Won't remember the 80%. Was it 70%? Was it 100? What was it? Forgot. But you remember the story. Okay, so just in the back of your mind, the best, I think, learning for my students is those that can move from the data to make the story. So you might, and sometimes I should have probably said this much earlier, so let me say it now. Go back maybe some of those key lessons and see if you can spin a story or listen to what I'm saying. Maybe I'm missing the story as well, so you can top the professor there. Go for it. Be better than me. I want you to, right? I get good karma. Here's the actual data. Then I just plotted it here, looking at the different journeys here in the different categories. So here's the percentage and the balance of rushing the youth. That drops. And then if you survive, you're back like Frank Gore. So there's kind of a pattern there. Notice the rushing fantasy points, though, is still decreasing. So, the dynasty people need to think about that. Passing, you're peaking and then drop. Okay, you're peaking 27 to 30, and your fantasy points pretty level, and then hot potato, it explodes on you right here. So when I'm making a story, I know I got numbers, but to me, I can make a story easier from these bar graphs with pretty colors, right? So, take your phone, take a picture of this, and just have it there and look at it, right? You're thinking and thinking and thinking, okay? And if that's not what you're doing with the data, I'm telling you, your competition is. So where you're goofing around, swilling out a case of beer every weekend, your competition's getting ready to crush your butt in the fantasy leagues. They're listening and hopefully listen to my stuff, and they're going to crush your butt. So there you go. Clown around or get serious, right? So there you go. An old lesson for the professor here. So we have age sector, rank sector. So I went down to the next quarter and just made a scales here just to look at the rushing and the passing scales there. Not a lot of difference in the youth. Notice the passing comes on and we see the peak passing here and we drop. And notice it's even more skewed in the best. 90% the rushing is showing here. So it's another way to tell the metrics here. But even in the lesser running backs, the ones that are not going to be the marquee, what are they doing? They're still catching passes 24 to 30 even. So, and they're still giving them a shot at rushing, right? Look, it's still higher, but then it drops. They already figured out by 23, you can either rush or you can't. On average, drops. And then if you can survive and you're still good enough to be in the league, but you're not good enough to be in the top group, then you're still going to be more of a rusher than a passer. And if you're in the top group, you're very much the rusher versus the passer. So again, there's that story. And then here's just the data looking at that story again to bring home the message to you. And I just went through it, but you can go through it again here. I know I'm wearing you out with the length of this, but I didn't feel like making a third part 3. I guess I could have, but I didn't want to. But I could have. So here's that. I think either way, look at this, get the story, remember the story. Here's the balance of the players. That's another way to look at this. So regardless of how good you are, you still are skewed towards rushing as a youth. And you're maybe still staying rushing is the balance, but the passing starting to pick up. If you're not a good of rusher, you better be a better passer. Notice it's getting close, and notice by 27 to 30 in the lower levels, the only ones surviving are catching passes. The ones that are still producing, they're the rushers. And if you're living to 31 plus, you're pretty much skewed to the rushing. So you're rushing, maybe staying rushing, and in rushing. So the best are able to still pick up and do the rushing. I mean, you're dropping in balance, right? 60-40, and you're 57-43, 55-45, right? So the top ones are still moving up and passing, but the ones that are not able to make the best, they've got to be catching passes. Or what are they doing, right? They're not rushing, can't rush for us, so they better be catching passes to earn their keep. So if I'm dynasty and somebody's not really making this progression, if they're not a marquee player, then if they're not doing passing, I'd get rid of them early in this age bracket. I wouldn't wait too late. 24, 25. I wouldn't wait. That's telling you something, because I don't know if they're going to make it here if they cannot catch passes. So, look at the skill sets there in these running backs that are stuck in the next group there. Here's the balance, just showing the same show. If you're rookies, you're expected to rush. Passing is a skill you have to get. Notice the 50th to 74th. Notice very close. Notice we're still skewed to the rush. Getting less skewed to the rush. and then very skewed to the rush if you survive to 31. And notice here, completely to the passing at this point. This may tell the best story here of the balance of the players here. Here's the overall experience balance. A little bit hard to see this, and we will go through it. But I did the color metric here. So looking at the top, looking at the scaled average, scaled wise, the rookies are actually producing a lot of fantasy points for the passing and versus the rushing. I think that's quite interesting. And notice that starts going away at year 2. It's gone by year 3. Back at year 4, 5, 6, 7, and then drops again by, looking at the fantasy points. What it's saying is probably if you're in the top running back, you're producing probably rushing and passing to be there. But the lesser ones are, you're got to be a pass catcher. See, look at the rushing's not good. Okay, rushing sucks. So running backs that are fated to be in the bottom half of the half, I guess, they're not rushers. So I think that decision is going to be made early in their career. So remember that story. And so whether they stay in the league means can they pass catch. So I think that's what we're learning, just experience-wise as well. And you can look at the actual scaled passing versus rushing balance there. And I think it probably tells you the same thing I just told you here. And I'm running out of steam. It's 51 minutes. Oh my goodness. Sometimes no human should have to listen to me drone on for 50 minutes. Ha ha. I'd probably already shut it down, gone and got a beer, then come back, right? Dissipate your thinking and come back, because this is a lot to take in. In this lesson, you may need to go back and, like I said, if you can remember the story, then I think maybe it will stick with you a lot more than these endless charts. Oh my God, Dr. Bush, we're dying out here. It's good. Chop that wood, then you can get some fire. You've got to earn it, or you get an F. Same thing here, rank sectors and experience levels, looking at the skew of the passing versus the experience levels, and I think you're going to see the pass catching show in the bottom half of these players. The story remains that they're pretty much got to be pretty good pass catchers at some points. And like I said, if you're lasting so long in 11 years, then you're probably a rusher at that point, because you're pass catching, you're just not fast enough. And these young defensive corners are shellacking you big time. Okay. What else? So I think you can look then. I probably got the chart. Oh my goodness, another chart. Here is the rushing, and you can see the dominance here, and the dominance is you're starting to lose some of the dominance here, and it's actually overtaking. Then it's coming back, and it's gone again. And if you're surviving long enough, you're definitely a rusher. Very skewed story at that point, year 11 here. Very skewed. So the best are staying the rushers, but they start balancing with pass catching. And then at year 6, the best rushers are, they've earned their keep, and, they survive up to year 7. And then some different year. Look like they're pass catchers and then they're not, then they are. So nobody said the data was going to be so clear. Sorry. Don't you wish it was all so clear and easy? Sorry, it's not. Take a look, see what you think. Yay, I've done it. I've survived in under an hour. I know you're like throwing the beer cans at your computer by now. This is the long, long slog of a process. But hey, do you want to win or do you want to goof around? Okay, Dr. Bush tries to help you. I probably should have parsed this into two because I'm wore out. I know you're wore out. But there's just so much extra good stuff in here. It's just extra fun, extra good data. We're excited. Come on now. Let's crush this league this year. You can do it. Keep listening to my lessons. Okay? You can do this. Okay, this is the process. My name is Dr. John Bush, the blowhard that is Mr. Metrics. Come back if I had run you off. Okay, come back.